Spokesperson William Tladi.
Firefighters had to extinguish the blazing fires, about 10 of the shacks that were well alight. Then after the fire was contained and extinguished, search and rescue was commenced.
And the unpredictability,
and unfortunately, 2 charred bodies were discovered under the
You're
rubble.
listening to the BBC.
Now it's day 18 of the national lockdown, and South Africans are now halfway through 35 days of being confined to their homes. Last week, President Cyril Ramaphosa extended the initial 21-day lockdown by an additional 14 days, meaning it will last until the end of April. The number of confirmed cases in the country now sits at 2,173, while the death toll remains at 25. Mia Lindeke reports.
Gauteng accounts for 40% of the national number of confirmed coronavirus cases, with 865 positive samples. 62 people in this province have since been hospitalized. Johannesburg has the largest number of COVID-19 patients at over 460, but this number is expected to increase as the latest breakdown per district has not yet been made public. The Western Cape accounts for 587 confirmed cases, while the Free State has 96. KwaZulu-Natal has recorded the highest number of deaths related to COVID-19 and now has 443 confirmed coronavirus cases. Mia Lindeke, Eyewitness News.
While staying with the president, he says he's encouraged by the support extended by the rest of the world to Africa in the fight against COVID-19, saying it shows that we are all in this together. In his capacity as African Union Chair, Ramaphosa has appointed special envoys to mobilize international economic support for the continent's fight against COVID-19. Among those chosen is Nigeria's former Finance Minister, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, and South Africa's very own former Finance Minister, Trevor Manuel. There have been concerns over Africa's testing capacity, with a limit in testing kits and other tools to curb the spread of the virus. The presidency's Kusala Diko.
These are internationally respected economists, business people, and include amongst them the former ministers of finance in South Africa, Rwanda, and Nigeria. Now, the envoys are expected to expedite the process of securing economic support as pledged by, amongst others, the G20, the European Union, as well as other international financial institutions.
Now, as the Easter weekend comes to a close, Western Cape traffic officials are reiterating calls for the public to stay at home. Over 600 people have been arrested since the start of the long weekend in the province. Officials have been keeping a close eye on the N1 and the Garden route, as several vehicles have been caught attempting to move between provinces. Provincial Traffic Chief Kenny Africa.
And we will deal with those taxi drivers or any other driver for that matter who's not adhering to the regulations. We are doing everything in our power to stop this.
Africa says roadblocks will continue throughout the province.
The only time that you will be allowed to be on the road is, firstly, if you are rendering essential services, if you are on your way to a shop or a pharmacy or a doctor. Only 2 persons are allowed to be in that vehicle. That's the driver and 1 passenger. And the passenger must be at the back.
And an international update on the coronavirus. Iran's death toll has risen to 4,585 after 111 deaths were recorded overnight. Iran, the hardest hit country in the Middle East, now has over 73,000 cases of COVID-19. More than 3,000 of those patients are in critical condition. Indonesia has recorded 316 new cases of the respiratory disease today, bringing the total number of infections in that country to 4,557. The Southeast Asian country has an additional 26 deaths related to COVID-19, bringing the death toll to 399. In Spain now, some non-essential workers are returning to work today after the health minister eased some of the lockdown restrictions. Minister Salvador Illa has, however, emphasized that the country remains in a state of lockdown and called on those heading back to work to continue following strict social distancing rules. Public transport will also begin operating. However, Illa has urged those who can to continue working from home. Spain has the 3rd highest death toll in the world, with almost 17,000 fatalities, and there are currently more than 160,000 confirmed cases. Globally, more than 1.8 million people have been infected, and 144,000 have have died. However, there have been 423,000 recoveries of the virus. A partly cloudy day with isolated thunderstorms in store for Gauteng. Joburg, a low of 13 and a high of 27 degrees. Pretoria, 14 and 28. Vereeniging, 12 and 27. Cape Town is cloudy with a southwesterly wind down the high of 20 degrees. The top story in Eyewitness News this hour as temperatures continue to drop and residents remain under lockdown seeking warmth. A shack fire has claimed the life of a father and his 3-year-old child at the Good Hope Informal Settlement in Germiston.
Eyewitness News. In touch, in tune and independent. For the latest, visit ewn.mobi.
In is the new out.
With socialdistance.co.za. 702 Music.
With Kenny Maestri.
From the BBC World Service. Spain has started allowing people back to work. Italy is set to follow, but many parts of the lockdown will stay.
We can't have concerts, we can't have cinema. Now it's impossible to imagine that restaurants can reopen.
I'm Nick Miles. Also today at 10 hours GMT. Oil producers have cut output as demand during the pandemic has slumped. Later in the programme, an added challenge in parts of the United States.
On this side of my ear, I could hear the tornado making rumbling noises, so I went in the bathroom and took shelter.
Dozens of twisters wreak havoc there, and the rise of bizarre dreams in these worrying times.
The way this coronavirus feels, how it changes daily, what we're expected to adapt to, and the number of stresses and the unpredictability of it all, I think that's what's going on here.
You're listening to the BBC.
Hello, I'm David Harper with the BBC News. Spain, one of the countries hardest hit by the coronavirus pandemic, has allowed more businesses to open after a month-long lockdown that's brought much of the economy to a standstill. Thousands of employees in certain sectors are being allowed to go back to work as long as they adhere to strict safety guidelines. Our European correspondent Damien McGuinness says this has caused controversy.
The ruling to get manufacturing and construction, for example, back to work, that comes from Madrid, from central government. Catalonia, the government there, the regional government, says this is irresponsible. So it's a controversial issue. I think we're seeing this debate across Europe because no one really knows what the correct thing to do is. It's about balancing the least worst scenario. The difficulty is how you get the economy moving and then what safety restrictions you have in place in order to stop a fresh outbreak.
Turkish officials have issued more than $1 million worth of fines in Istanbul alone for breaches of a hastily implemented coronavirus lockdown. The sudden announcement on Friday of a 48-hour curfew in 31 cities sparked panic buying. China's northeastern border with Russia has become a new frontline in the fight against the coronavirus as the Beijing government reports a rise in new infections. China has more than 100 fresh cases, the highest daily figure in 5 weeks. Robin Brandt is in Shanghai.
The vast majority of these people are Chinese nationals returning home, and we've seen really tough restrictions, including limiting the number of flights coming to China, people facing mandatory quarantine once they arrive and repeated testing. But what we're seeing is loopholes with clusters emerging, particularly on a rather obscure land border between Russia and China in the north, the province of Heilongjiang there. And we're seeing clusters of Chinese nationals entering there, although that border has now been closed in the last couple of weeks, and many of those bringing coronavirus with them.
People arriving in the regional capital Harbin from abroad will have to go into quarantine for 4 weeks. Russia has reported its biggest daily increase in coronavirus cases so far. There have been 2,500 new infections, more than half in Moscow. As Steve Rosenberg reports, the Russian capital is coming under increasing strain.
At the weekend, President Putin's spokesman admitted that the situation in Moscow hospitals was extremely tense due to the influx of patients. Doctors, he added, were working heroically. On Saturday, on the edge of Moscow, dozens of ambulances were seen queuing outside a hospital handling coronavirus cases, waiting to drop off patients. In an effort to slow the spread of the virus, the city authorities are now tightening the lockdown. Muscovites will now be required to obtain digital permits before being allowed to travel around Moscow in cars, taxis or on public transport.
Steve Rosenberg reporting. World News from the BBC. Oil prices have stabilised after the largest ever cut in production was agreed by key producers around the world. Brent crude went up by about 5%, but then fell back. The agreement between OPEC, Russia and other exporters will slash about a tenth of global output. It followed an unusual intervention by President Trump in support of the OPEC efforts to strike a deal. Health experts in South Africa are warning that discriminating against people infected with the coronavirus could harm efforts to stop it spreading, as people will be reluctant to get tested. People isolating after infection say they have been stigmatised and humiliated by neighbours. Sibulele Kogwana is a clinical psychologist in South Africa.
If people fear stigma more than the virus, it then becomes a barrier that they won't go ahead and go for testing, or even if they do go for testing, they would be afraid to disclose because of fear of stigma, which then creates a huge problem, because testing is one of the most important things in terms of fighting this virus.
The country now has more than 2,000 confirmed cases. America's Afghan peace envoy Zalmay Khalilzad has welcomed the release of prisoners by both the Taliban and the government as an important step towards the reduction of violence. He said both sides should accelerate efforts to meet targets set out in the agreement signed between the US and the Taliban in February. The Afghan government is in the process of identifying 20 prisoners released by the militants on Sunday, the first to be set free by the Taliban since February's accord. A large part of the southern United States has been hit by extreme weather, including powerful tornadoes. In Mississippi, at least 6 people were killed. Houses were destroyed and trees uprooted. A state emergency has been declared in Mississippi and the neighbouring state of Louisiana. More than 60,000 homes are without power. BBC News.
Thanks. You're listening to the Newsroom from the BBC World Service with me, Nick Miles. It certainly won't be business as usual, but 2 of the countries worst affected by coronavirus are taking the first tentative steps towards it. Spain, whose infection rate appears to
coronavirus. As of Sunday, 5 cases of COVID-19 have been reported in Burundi with no deaths. For the clergy, this is a new opportunity to demonstrate its power.
Nous célébrons celui qui a le pouvoir et la force de guérir, même ceux qui sont malades.
The Burundian government has decided that for the moment there will be no measures that could interfere with the code, normal functioning of the lives of its citizens, end of quotes.
This is the morning call here on Africa News, coming to you in English and in French. A reminder of our top stories this morning. To the DRC, where Vital Kamerhe's request for bail was rejected by the Kinshasa Matete Peace Court on Saturday, 11 April. According to his lawyers, the president's chief of staff had formally filed the request for provisional release from Makala prison during a hearing in the council chamber. Also in the DRC, a second case linked to Ebola was recorded in the country just as the nation was preparing to officialize the end of the epidemic. Now let's take a look at some of today's newspaper headlines. Let's start this press review with the appointment of 4 special envoys of the African Union to mobilize international economic support for Africa, as explained by Impact SN. These are Dr. Ngozi Okojo-Iweala, former director of the World Bank. Second is Dr. Donald Kaberuka, former president of the African Development Bank. We also have former boss of Credit Suisse, Tijani Thiam, also joining the list, along with Trevor Manuel, individual, former finance minister of South Africa. These four personalities will be responsible for requesting rapid and concrete support from international institutions in order to help African countries face economic challenges. To date, Africa has more than 13,000 confirmed cases and more than 700 deaths, according to the African Union Center for Disease Prevention and Control.
On reste dans ce chapitre.
Now let's head to Senegal. The number of people recovering from the coronavirus is increasing, according to Presse Afrique. As of yesterday, 171 people had been registered by the health authorities as of Sunday, April 12th. This high recovery rate is due to a therapeutic protocol and not essentially chloroquine, according to the online platform.
La chloroquine, écrit le site. And we end
in Burkina Faso, where Easter was rather gloomy. In a dominantly Christian country, the coronavirus pandemic is gaining ground with its deadly toll of infected and dead. Not a very special Easter celebration took place. An Easter 2.0, they called it, where the faithful shared Holy Mass via radio and television. An innovation used in these times of isolation and social distancing. And this is the end of this edition of the Press Review.
Par la conjoncture actuelle et les indispensables mesures de distanciation sociale plus difficiles à mettre en pratique sous notre pic. À vous le quotidien. Voici quelques-unes de titres.
Of course, you can find more on all our platforms and on our website, africanews.com. Now to some international news. An unusual Easter celebration observed around the world. In Italy, for the first time, Pope Francis gave his Easter blessing behind closed doors of the St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. The faithful followed the Mass and blessing via live stream. Here is the report.
A different kind of Easter from St. Peter's Basilica. No bands played the Vatican anthem. Nearby streets were empty and silent as Italy continues to respect a nationwide coronavirus lockdown. Inside the Basilica, surrounded only by his closest collaborators, Pope Francis delivered his traditional Easter message to the city of Rome and the world. The Pope said the resurrection of Jesus is not a magic formula that makes problems vanish. This victory does not bypass suffering and death, but passes through them, opening a way in the abyss, transforming evil into good. The Pope then expressed his gratitude and affection to doctors and nurses and to all who work diligently to guarantee the essential services necessary for civil society, and to the law enforcement and military personnel who in many countries have helped ease people's difficulties and sufferings.
And more people in Sweden are opting for hospital assistant jobs. Training consists of assisting nurses, doctors and retirement homes in order to compensate for the lack of health personnel in the fight against the coronavirus.
Dans cette lutte contre la pandémie du coronavirus.
Former employees of airlines and hotels in Sweden, forced out of work due to the coronavirus, have not given up. They have seen in it an opportunity to train as assistants in hospitals or retirement homes, a much-needed workforce during the coronavirus pandemic.
Here in the Stockholm region, we are in big need of this kind of support out in the elderly care and also in the homes. Because now, slowly, the COVID-19 is spreading along this group of people.
Caregivers and patients with symptoms are tested in these tents and sent to hospitals in Stockholm if necessary. Nearly 900 people have died from the coronavirus in Sweden, and there are nearly 10,000 confirmed cases in the country.
Merci de votre...
Thank you.